Welcome back to the Fourth Way Podcast. Purity of heart is to will one thing. Chapter 9. The price of willing one thing. The exposure of evasions. But the one who in truth wills the good puts cleverness to an inward use, in order to prevent all evasions and thereby to help him enter into and persist in the commitment. Cleverness is indeed a great power, yet it is treated by him as an insignificant servant, as a shrewd, contemptible one. He hears the servant, to be sure, but in action he is not guided by him. He uses cleverness against himself as a spy and informer, which informs him instantly of each evasion, yes, even gives warning at any suspicion of an evasion. Now, just as the thief knows the hidden way and goes by it, so the authorities also know it and go by it in order to detect the thief. But the knowledge as knowledge is the same in both cases. This is the way he makes use of cleverness. I do not know whether it is true that at each man's birth 2 angels are born, his good and his bad angel. But this I do believe, and I will gladly listen to any objection, although I will not believe it, that at each man's birth there comes into being an eternal vocation for him, expressly for him. To be true to himself in relation to this eternal vocation is the highest thing a man can practice, and, as that most profound poet has said, self-love is not so vile a sin as self-neglecting. Then there is but one fault, one offense, disloyalty to his own self, or the denial of his own better self. One who is guilty of such a fault is not like a thief or a robber. The civil authority will not lie in wait for him. This fault may begin its course in complete silence, so that none will be aware of it. Is it, therefore, perhaps of no account? Certainly many believe that a man can search out and grasp the truth just as well, creatively express the beautiful just as well, vitally perfect the good just as well, even if in order to win some advantage in the world he was secretly a little unfaithful to himself, even if he did shift the boundary stones of his inner life a particle by just a shade less scrupulousness, so that even though he had won this material advantage by doubtful means, yet he can truly work for the good, the beautiful, and the true. So low an estimate of the good, and the beautiful, and the true is expressed by this as to think that it ought to be able to make use of anyone as a serviceable instrument from whom to elicit a harmonious strain, anyone, even the one that has polluted himself. Yes, man can deceive himself, and men, but when eternity listens attentively, listens in order to discover whether the playing of strings is pure and in time with itself, alas, it instantly detects false tones and hesitation. It rejects such a man just as a connoisseur rejects a stringed instrument when it is damaged. Alas, it is indeed a sorry cleverness, however much it boasts of the material advantage that it won as a proof of its folly, however much it points to the badges of distinction, and thereby again to the hidden dejection within. A sorry cleverness that deceives itself about what is the highest of all. The only genuine cleverness is that which helps a man in all devotedness truly to will the good. The one who truly wills the good, therefore, makes use of cleverness against evasions. But by this, does he not achieve something great in the world? Perhaps so, perhaps not. But one thing definitely he does become. He becomes a friend, a lover of memory. And so, when in a quiet hour memory visits him, and already, at this point, how different it is from that visit when memory threateningly knocks at the door of the double-minded man. Then it says to him, "Do you remember that time when the good resolution conquered within you?" And he answers, "Yes, dear one." But then memory continues, and between lovers, memory is so dear that they almost prefer to the sight of each other the whisper of memory when they say, "Can you remember that time?" and "Can you remember that time?" Memory continues, "Can you remember all the hardships and sufferings you endured for the sake of the resolution?" He answers, "No, dear one, I have forgotten that. Let it remain forgotten." But when in the toils of life and struggle, when in my troubled thoughts all is in confusion, it may seem to me as if even that was forgotten which I know I had willed in sincerity. O thou hast thy very name from that act of remembering, thou messenger of the eternal. Memory. At that hour, visit me, and bring with thee the long-desired, the strengthening meeting with thyself once more. And memory answers in parting, I promise you that. I swear it to you by all eternity. Then they part one from another, for so it must be here in the world of time. Deeply moved, he takes one more look after memory's vanishing form, as one looks after a glorified saint. Now it is gone, and so has the quiet hour. It was only a quiet hour. It was not some great moment. On that account, he hoped that memory would keep its promise. He preserved in his own soul that stillness in which he met with memory when it was pleased to visit him. To him this is his reward, and to him this reward is above all others. Yes, just as a mother who carries her beloved children asleep at her breast along a difficult road is not troubled about what may happen to her, but only fears that the child may be disturbed and upset, so he, too, does not fear the troubles of the world on his own account. He is only troubled lest these should upset and disturb that possibility of a visit that slumbers in his soul. The one who in truth wills the good also uses cleverness on the outer world. It is no disgrace to be clever. It is a good thing. It is no disgrace that the authorities are clever, that they shrewdly know how to trace the criminal's hidden trail in order to seize him and make him harmless. In so far as the good man is clever, he too knows how in the very face of truth the world wishes to have the good made agreeable, how the crowd desires to be won, the much-feared crowd, who desire that the teacher shall tremble before his hearers and flatter them. He knows all about this, in order not to follow it, but rather by the very opposite conduct to keep as free as possible of these deceptions, that he himself may not adopt any illicit way of deriving some advantage from the good, earning money, distinction, and admiration, and so that he may deceive no one by a figment of the imagination. Whenever possible, he will prefer to withdraw the good from contact with the crowd. He will seek to split the crowd up in order to get hold of the individual, or to get each by himself. He will be reminded of what that simple old sage remarked in ancient times. When they meet together, and the world sets down at an assembly, or in a court of law, or a theater, or a camp, or in any other popular resort, and there's a great uproar, and they praise some things which are being said or done, and blame other things, equally exaggerating both, shouting and clapping their hands, and the echo of the rocks and the place in which they are assembled redoubles the sound of the praise or blame, at such a time will not a young man's heart, as they say, leap within him? And indeed, this is exactly what is necessary in order in truth to will the good, that a man's heart should leap, but leap with the unspoiled quality of youth. And therefore the good man, in case he is also a clever one, will see that if anything is able to be done for the good, then he must try to get men to be alone. The same persons who singly, as solitary individuals, are able to will the good, are immediately seduced as soon as they associate themselves and become a crowd. On that account, the good man will neither seek to secure the assistance of a crowd in order to split up the crowd, nor will he seek to have a crowd back of him during the time that he breaks up the crowd in front of him. But just how the good man will make use of cleverness in the outer world does not permit of being more precisely specified in general terms, for that which is necessary can be totally different with respect to each time and to the circumstances of each time. That stern prophet, who went out into the desert and lived on locusts, knew how, in relation to his contemporaries, he ought to express this decisively, that it is not the truth that is in need of men, but men who are in need of the truth. Hence they must come to him, come out into the desert. Out there was no opportunity for them to be able to decorate the truth, to be able most graciously to do something for it. Out there where the axe did not lie in the woods, but at the foot of the solitary tree, and where each tree that did not bear good fruit was bound to be chopped down. Yes, to be sure, there have been self-appointed judges since that time who have erred and chopped away at the whole forest, and the crowd found it most flattering. Again, there was that simple wise man who worked for the good under the form of a joke. He knew by his cleverness exactly what his frivolous people needed, in order that they should not simply take the earnestness of the good in vain, and thereby be led to pay the wise man a good deal of money as a reward for having deceived them. The form of the joke prevented their misusing the good's earnestness. The opposition of the joke, on the other hand, made their frivolity obvious. It was the judgment. Without this cleverness, the frivolous ones would, in all probability, have imitated him in being earnest. Now, on the contrary, he confronted them with the choice, and see, they chose the joke. They never even noticed that there was anything earnest in it, because there was no earnestness in them. This was the judgment and the judge's conduct. His art was paganism's highest ingenuity, for the Christian type has still another consideration. Yet this too may not be generalized upon. It applies only to that initiated one whose secret it is, so that by paying close attention to such an individual, one can learn to know a whole generation, concluding from him, from the form he found it necessary to clothe himself in, how the entire age must have been. But it is certain, and acknowledged by all, that each one who in truth wills the good is not in the world in order to conjure up an appearance of the good, thus winning approval in the eyes of the world and becoming a man who is beloved by all. He has not the task of changing the good into a thing of the moment, into something that shall be voted upon in a noisy gathering, or something that swiftly gains some disciples who also will the good up to a certain degree. No, he has always the task, not by word nor by intention, but by the sincere inner concentration of his own life, the task of making it most obvious of all that his surroundings have been set in opposition to him, not in order that he shall judge in terms of words, but in order that his life may unconditionally serve the good in action. The task is his own obligation in the service of the good. Judging is not his real function, not his act, but is an accompaniment whereby the surrounding world relates itself to him. Judging is not his activity, because to will the good, in truth, is his activity. Yet his suffering is an act of judging, because the surrounding world becomes manifest by the manner in which it lets him suffer. And at the same time, by these sufferings he is helped to test himself as to whether it actually is the good that he wills, or whether he himself is caught up in a deception. Above all, the one who in truth wills the good must not be busy. In quiet patience he must leave it to the good itself, what reward he shall have, and what he shall accomplish. He dare not allow himself a single word of compromise, not a glance. He dare not ask the slightest relief from the world. He has only to give himself up to the good, and to that thing, and to that person that might possibly be helped by him. He is no judge. On the contrary, he is just the opposite. He is the one who is judged. He effects a judgment only in the sense that the surrounding world becomes manifest by how it judges him. But in this way, does he accomplish nothing at all, since he is weighed down with men's opposition and then gets the worst of the battle? Now in this life, indeed, no. And in eternity, never. In this life, indeed, no, for the one who sincerely trusts in God is enthusiastic. He is not like a candle stub whose tiny flame goes out before a wind. No, he is like a great fire. A storm cannot quench it. And the flame in his fire is like that one in Greece. Water cannot put it out. And even if finally the world does make him suffer on that account, neither the good nor he has lost. For to be too far up in the world is most often, as in the ordeal that is called trial by water, a sign of guilt. To be sure, since the world puts more store by the fashionable than by the truly good, just on that account, in the reckoning of the moment, he will accomplish far less by not giving in, not bargaining, not even making himself comfortable and powerful, by not willing to have profit for himself. But the remembering, let us indeed never forget the remembering, although a person might certainly believe that he would at least be able to forget. And shall not memory be able to remind him of that time when he sneaked away by underhanded means in order to avoid a decision, of that time when he gave the matter another turn in order to please men, of that time that he deserted his post in order to let the storm pass over, of that time he knuckled under in order to secure an easing off of his painful position, of that time he sought refuge and association with others, perhaps as it is called, in order to work all the more effectively for good's victory. That is, in order to make his own position a little less difficult than as though at that midnight hour, somewhat terror-stricken, one stood all alone with heavily loaded weapons at his dangerous post. Nay, what he accomplishes and what he does not accomplish in the sense of the moment, that is not his concern. He always accomplishes this, that he becomes the friend and lover of memory. He accomplishes this whether he is remembered in the world or not. For this world's memory is like the moment, a series of moments, eternity's memory that he is certain of. When he leaves this world, he leaves nothing behind him. He takes all with him. He loses nothing. He gains all, for God is all to him. All right, so this was a little bit of a short chapter, so just a little bit to pull out here. By the way, this, in my opinion, it seems like maybe the most similar chapter to Kierkegaard's Training in Christianity. So if you haven't read that, that would be something that if you really like this chapter and want it expounded on more, I think Training in Christianity gets a lot more into that because it focuses on the simple wise man, right? It focuses on Jesus and the ways that we've kind of misunderstood him and such. And so I'd recommend reading that. It wasn't my favorite of Kierkegaard's works. I would say Purity of Heart is to Will One Thing is like my favorite of Kierkegaard's works, and maybe probably like my favorite book of all time at this point. Sickness Unto Death was also really good, and I liked Attack Upon Christendom, and then Training in Christianity would come after that for me. It was interesting, but also I might not have said that about Purity of Heart is to Will One Thing the first read through. Kierkegaard is somebody that you probably have to go through a couple times in order to really know how much you like some of his works. And I've only gone through Training in Christianity once. So, but anyway. So in this chapter, Kierkegaard talks about two things that he is kind of famous for talking about, and their ideas set in opposition to each other. Right? There's the individual and the crowd. And so just understanding Kierkegaard's historical context at this point, he is under he's in a society where the church is powerful. It's wrapped up with politics. There's just a lot of showiness. There's a lot of institutionalization. And so Kierkegaard, he looks around and he's like, this is not Christianity. Like, this is gross. It's so corrupted. The priests and pastors and all that. Like, it's no good. And so he kind of rails against that crowd mentality. Just this idea that everybody just kind of falls in line with a society and a crowd. And so Kierkegaard's focus is very much the individual. And you have to understand his context, because he isn't saying the individual is all that matters. What he's doing is he's saying everybody's in this crowd. I need to get people to wake up and to look at themselves in the mirror that he talked about a couple chapters ago, right? They have to stop. They have to look in the mirror. They have to see themselves, because everybody has to make a decision for themselves. And so Kierkegaard, as like the father of existentialism, right? This focus on the individual, he's very famous for that. And I think he's very misunderstood in that regard, because the focus on the individual, if you read this chapter closely, he's not saying like whatever you feel is good. He talks about having an individual vocation. Like, people are called to different things, and you need to search yourself and figure out what you're called to. But that's not a subjective thing per se. It's not whatever you feel, right? It's not all about the individual, because all throughout this chapter and throughout the whole work and all of his works, he talks there are objective goods, right? So yeah, there are subjective applications to, some people might have money and there's to use that a different way, and some people might have vows of poverty. Like, you might be called to different things, but in each case you should give all, even if the wealthy person does end up having money. Like, all that they do is supposed to be directed to the good. So anyway, it's not completely subjective individualism. He's trying to call people out of the crowd, and the crowd is just absolutely wicked to Kierkegaard. And I think I think that's by and large the case. Like around the same time, you've got Gustave Le Bon, who wrote the work, The Crowd, and which is fantastic. Like you want to see how crowds work. If you want to understand why Kierkegaard hates the crowd, read Le Bon's work, and you can see that crowds are a terrible thing, and you lose all individuality. You lose volition. Like it's like a school of fish or a flock of birds that are all moving in unison. There's like you need individuality, and of course, people take that and run with it too far in one direction, and everything now is all about the self and what you feel and subjective and all that. So for a really good work on this that shows you, well, how do you have community and individuality? I highly recommend Bernard Eller's work. I think it's called Kierkegaard and Discipleship, but it's free online. I'll post it in the show notes. But it's a fantastic work that gets you to learn more about Kierkegaard, and also helps you to understand what Kierkegaard means by the individual and how he can still have community. Because the Great Commission is not to convert people; it's to make disciples, and discipleship involves community. And so that I would highly recommend following up on those right there. Finally, the one little snippet that I do want to pull out of this section was I thought it was interesting. It's near the end of the chapter where he talks about the role of the good, and this relates to Jesus. He doesn't bring Jesus up at this point, but I mean very clearly he's, I think, referencing his life, where he talks about how the person who does the good, they break away from the crowd, and they don't care about having the crowd behind them or the crowd that's before them. They just focus on willing the good. And sometimes I think what's easy for people, and a trap that I can fall into, is my focus shifts, it deviates away from the good to focus on judging the people who are the current antithesis of that good. So for me, it's very easy for me in the crowd that is behind me, or I'm sorry, the crowd that I guess would be in front of me, in my conservative Christian group, it is very easy for me in pursuing what I think is the good to deviate from heading directly for the good in order to judge the crowd, in order to criticize them, lambast them, whatever, talk derogatorily about them. Like that, I can deviate from that. And I can tell myself that I'm doing good in that. But what Kierkegaard is saying is, he's like, no, you pursue the good. You go directly at the good. And it doesn't mean you don't speak out against the crowd. Of course you speak out against the crowd. But your job is not judgment and looking down on, and that's not your role. What your role is to pursue the good. And in doing good, you're probably going to suffer at the hands of the crowd, and that is the judgment. Very much like the cup of wrath in Revelation, and how the blood gets stored up, and eventually that becomes a group's own judgment, right? They store up their own judgment. It's kind of like that thing where, yes, bad might be done towards the one who is pursuing the good. But if you just look at Jesus, right, you can see that obviously he was good and the people who did that to him were evil. That didn't prevent his pain, his torture, his crucifixion, his death, right? It didn't get prevented by us in the future being able to look back and see that. But it's very much akin to, in our season on nonviolent action, when we talk about some of the turning points in like the civil rights movement, when you see kids getting fire hosed and having dogs sicked on them. A big part of nonviolent action is to awaken the moral senses. You can say that another group is not human. You can even treat them that way in the way you look down on them and talk about them. But when you start to see what we would perceive as the most innocent in that group being harmed significantly or even killed, or like seeing the open casket of Emmett Till, like that awakens the senses in people who may have been on the fringe or who may have been self-deceiving about how bad things really are. And that's even like in Nazi Germany. Okay, people see their neighbors being taken away, but you can deceive yourself. Oh well, they're just going to another country. They're going to a labor camp, and none of those are good things. Don't get me wrong, but if the massive Germans would have been taken through an extermination camp, some of them would have been awakened to the horrors of what was going on. When it's not directly in front of you, there are a lot more people who just fall in line because it's a whole lot easier to do. And so what Kierkegaard here, I think, is saying is, well, number one, for you, the individual, you pursue the good. That's your job. But also, as kind of an aside, by you pursuing the good and receiving whatever the crowd decides to divvy out to you in terms of punishment or derision or whatever, in that you are going to be judging the crowd just by the way that you're treated. Yeah, you're enduring the pain, the hurt, all that stuff. Yes, you have to endure that, and it seems like a punishment to you. But if you remember from earlier in Kierkegaard's work, that's not punishment. Right? Punishment is something different. Punishment is something that you deserve to get, and is a medicine. Like, this isn't punishment. What it really is it's a judgment on them. And it might be a judgment that isn't realized right away. You might not see it as a judgment or as that bad of a thing because it doesn't hurt them now. But it is a judgment. We've talked about George Whitefield on the show a bit before. What he did at the time to support an orphanage by bringing slavery to Georgia and by obtaining slaves, something that he had spoken out against previously, like when he did that, took on slaves in order to do a good thing, build an orphanage, right? He thought he was doing a good thing. He got in with the crowd, in with the pro-slavery crowd, and he did do something that functionally was good to help orphans, but it wasn't the good, right? And maybe he was praised by that then, like, oh, good job, Whitefield, you built an orphanage. Oh, look at his theology, like, let's read George Whitefield. But now, when we look back on that and we see what he did, that's judgment, right? What was done was judgment. What he may have said about those who oppose slavery. I mean, I don't know if he said anything against them, but the things that he said against them and the things that he did, like, now are judgment upon him. And that should be sobering for us because in a previous chapter, Kierkegaard said, hey, be careful. Don't judge the past because you're modernity and you're doing the same things. Most likely. Right? What are we doing to the immigrant right now? I'm recording this like the first week since Trump has taken the White House. And there are some immigration policies that are significantly harming a lot of people, hurting people. What's being done about that, right? What are Christians doing to stand against that or to speak out against that? Or the issue in Israel and Palestine, like what they are doing in Palestine, what Israel is doing and the United States is doing in Palestine is horrendous. It's horrendous. So it's easy to criticize Whitefield or others from the past, but we are essentially doing the same thing because we are just part of a different crowd. And so Kierkegaard here is asking you, the reader, asking me, the reader, to look at ourselves in the mirror. Are we part of the crowd? Almost certainly we're part of some crowd. How do we look just to the good, not worry about judging others, but through our actions to be judgment to those who who need judgment and to awaken them to their senses, how to be light in the darkness. So I think that's all I'm going to pull out from this chapter of Kierkegaard. And we're a little bit over halfway through his work. So come back next week for the next chapter.
That's all for now. So peace, and because I'm a pacifist, when I say it, I mean it. This podcast is a part of the Kingdom Outpost Network. Please check out the links below to find other great podcasts and content related to nonviolence and kingdom living.